Welcome back to another construct video, and in a recent video I showed you a trailer for my 3D engine I've been working on. What I want to do today is go through some of the main features of it and how you can start using it yourself. What I will not be doing today is doing a full breakdown of the code, as it's very long, and the point of this 3D engine is not for you to have to learn all this code. It's for you to be able to use some of the key functions and features in there to start building your own game much easier. So let's start off with the first key feature. So movement works in a very similar way to my other videos on creating 3D games inside of Construct. The only big difference here is we've now got acceleration and deacceleration. So you see it takes a bit of time to build up speed. And you can see in the debug menu, the fourth option down, we're actually got the player speed there as well. So you can see that. We've also got something called normalization. So if we were to able to move forward 1 meter every second, if we were able to move to the right 1 meter every second, by moving diagonal, you can move 1.4 meters every second. So normalization basically reduces that down. So even if you're moving at a diagonal, you're always moving at 1 meter per second. It's just doing a bit of trigonometry to calculate that. So there's our movement. So what happens if we want to customize this movement? So if we find our player in the world and click on our player, we get some different variables that appear. First of all is max speed. So how fast can our player move? So I'm moving at 500 is the max speed. Again, if you adjust this to be higher, you'll move faster. If you make this smaller, you'll move slower. We've also got the acceleration. Now this is added every single second. So you'd add 500 over a second. So this will take 1 second to get to max speed, and deceleration slows down by 500 every second. So if we were to make this number much bigger, then there'd be no acceleration, no deacceleration, because you'd reach max speed instantly. You could deaccelerate to 0 instantly, and that's how some games work. So again, that's up to you to decide and change. Obviously you can change this to 50, so it takes longer to reach that max speed. You might also want to customize the controls. Now you can do this in the main file, and you could just add a new event. However, what's easiest to do is to go into the input section inside the main event sheet. And if we click this option that says is not ignoring inputs, and we'll talk about what that is in just a second, you can see we've got the mouse and keyboard controls, so keyboard movements. So currently it's set to W, S, and D, as well as the arrow keys, and you can change all of those. You can delete them if you don't want the arrow keys to be used. We've got the camera as well. Now this just uses the mouse, so you probably don't want to change this for the camera one, but again, the option's there if you do. And gamepad as well for the movement. This uses the left analog stick, but you could set this up to use the buttons instead. So you can just change it, and we just go gamepad, and we'll just do on button pressed instead, and you can change that to be the D-pad if you wanted to. So we've got some options there as well if you want to customize your control or add new controls. Now it also talks about this start ignoring input. This is something you can tick before the game, or you can change it using a function, or just change the Boolean itself. And this disables every single control option. So again, this is something that you might want to do during, say, a cutscene. You might want to stop the player being able to move the camera. Once the cutscene's finished, you can untick that in runtime, and then the player can move again. So just a nice option to have. You might also notice the option above called Show Mobile Controls. So if we tick this on and start the game now, and again, this can be done in runtime if we wanted to as well. So now you can see we've got mobile controls on the screen, and we can just using my touch screen, so it's not the best, but we can move around, and we can do the same with the camera. So not only have we got keyboard and mouse, we've got controller, we've also got touch screen. Again, please ignore the FPS counter at the top. This is just because I've got OBS going. Without OBS, it runs about 110, 120, absolutely fine. Now, other thing that we've got is collision. So first of all, we've got ground collision. You see in our debug menu, it says on ground true. If I jump, you see that changes to false. And if I fall off the world, I've actually got gravity that'll cause me to fall. And then I'm back on there with just a bit of a respawn, bit of code there. Now we've also got collision for the walls as well. So we can't go through walls. This is quite an obvious thing. But again, if I push up against the wall, you see I can't go through it. What I have got though is checks. So I can check if there's a wall straight in front of me, if there's a wall to the left of me, if there's a wall behind, wall forward again. So this is again something that you can use to do some very, very useful checks for. So this time going into the main event sheet, if you're on the test world example, you get these example commands. The basic one doesn't have that because I've tried to remove all the bloat that I've added, showing off how this tool works, and I've just tried to do a more slimline, simple version of the tool. But under the example commands, there is a wall run ability. So I'm just going to toggle disable this. Now this is a work in progress and doesn't work the best, but what I'm doing is checking if the player is not on the ground, so they're in the air, if they're holding the A button down on the controller, if the Y input is greater than -0.5, this means they're holding forward and they've got the stick at least past halfway. So again, if you're on a keyboard, that doesn't matter because you're either holding the key down or not. But if you're on a controller or using the touch screens, the stick needs to be at least past halfway to show you're moving forward. Then if we've got a wall to the left or right of us, we set the DZ, which is how far we're currently falling down. So we're falling down 0 pixels every second now. And we set the velocity X to 0, so we can't move left or right now. We can only move forward until we let go of the wall by either let going of A, stopping pressing Y, no longer being on the ground, or no longer having the wall left or right of us. So let's quickly see that in action. So I've got this wall here. I'm just going to hug it. I'm just going to hold A, and you'll see that I'm gliding against it. And if I let go of A, I fall. This one's a bit buggy, but you get the idea of what we're able to do by just having some simple checks built in, like have you got a wall to the right of you. Next, we should talk about jumping. Now, I've actually set up 4 jumps for the player, but you can set up as many as you want. So you can have just a single jump, a double jump. You can have 6 jumps and be like Kirby if you want. But again, just jumping, key part of any game, very, very useful mechanic. And again, it's built in really, really easily here. So to access your jumping, just click on the player and you've got some different options here. So first of all, gravity, how far you fall down. Now, these numbers are not representing gravity you'd expect to find in other game engines. So this number does look quite small. Don't worry too much about that. Know that 5 is what it default as. And then if you want to make it obviously higher, you can make it higher. If you want to make it lower and have lower gravity, you can change that to make that lower as well. We've also got jump strength, so how high can you jump? So I'm going to up this slightly to allow me to jump a little bit higher. So number of jumps as well, it's how many jumps you can do before you got to touch the ground again. This is set to 2, so I can jump twice, and then when I touch the ground again, I can jump twice again after that. So again, really, really simple to customize your player to be the way that you want it to be. And then if we go back into the world, you'll see that we've got that added jump height. So now we can get up to these platforms much more easier with the new added jump height. Not quite there for that big jump there. So next feature I want to show off is projectiles. So you can spawn a projectile. I've set this to the right trigger on the Xbox controller. It's not set up for any of the other controls. So I'll show you how to set that up if you want to set that up for your mouse or keyboard. And if we go over to our targets, I've actually got a little bit of code that I'll show off in just a sec as well to actually break the targets and actually shoot them. So able to fire those at the target, and if we hit them, they'll destroy. If not, the projectile will just keep going forever and ever. And the projectiles are set up on a family, which means you can have multiple different types of projectiles, and you can change between them quite quickly and easily. So going to our object pane on the right side, we've got projectiles, and we've got this projectile example. Now we can control here the projectile speed, so how fast the projectile moves, and the lifetime of the projectile. Now, if you set this to -1, the projectile will last forever. If you give it a different value, say 2, after 2 seconds, the projectile will destroy itself. So again, just adding more customizable features to use in this tool. If you want to create your own projectile, you can just insert a new object, 3D shape. We'll call this projectile 2. To make this projectile different from our other one, I'm just going to paint the faces red, just so we know that this is a slightly different projectile. And what we'll do is we'll set this up on a mouse click so we're able to fire this projectile. Once you've created your projectile, you can then just go down to the families and make sure you add it to the projectile family. So to come to Edit, Projectile 2, add to the projectile family and press OK. On doing so, you get access to the 2 variables, the speed and the lifetime. So for this one, we're going to make a much faster projectile of say 5,000. We'll keep the projectile lifetime If it's traveling at 5,000, we won't see it before it gets destroyed anyway. And then finally, we need to actually make it so we can fire this projectile. So we're going to go into our main code. I'm just going to add a new event here. Go to my inputs, mouse and keyboard, mouse. And I'm going to say on click, we'll do the left click, add action. And we're going to go to player. And under the player, we've got some custom actions that we can use. And the custom projectile one says spawn projectile. And then we just need the name of the projectile. So this one's called projectile 2. You need to make sure it's typed exactly as it is on your right side on the project bar here. So projectile 2, hit done. And now we can just go back into our level. So when I click now, I get a new red projectile that fires. And if I use the Xbox controller, which is still set to the old projectile, I'll still fire the old projectile. So again, really easy to customize what you're currently firing. And then in terms of getting these projectiles to shoot the target, if you're interested code-wise, we're just checking if the projectile is overlapping the target. Now this only works for the X and Y, not the Z. So all we do is we check that the target is below the projectile's the elevation, but the target and the target's height is above. It basically just checks, is the bullet between the bottom of the target and the top of the target? If so, destroy the target, destroy the projectile. Next feature comes courtesy of FoozleCC. He did a video called Raycasting, which allows you to fire out a laser and check if that laser hits a particular object. Now, to visualize the laser, you can hold left trigger on the Xbox controller. You can also set this up for the keyboard or mobile controls. And again, this laser will point where the player is looking at. Now, the obvious thing to think about with this laser is a projectile. So you can see that I can actually bring it over to the targets and shoot and destroy these different projectiles. And one thing that you might notice, it might be a bit hard to show here, but I can show you with this bridge here, is the laser does not go through the bridge. It actually stops when it hits that object. It's a very, very clever bit of code. I think the code's a bit magic on the way it works, because I don't understand a good chunk of it. But again, please check out Foozle's channel and his itch page. Try out his example. It's amazing. This laser is really, really useful for something outside of a weapon. So for the laser example where I shoot the target, I check, is the player looking at object? Is the object a target? If so, get that instance of target and destroy it. For this one, you'll see that I've put the option of no. Now, if you select the option of no, instead of selecting a particular item, it will select all of them. So I'm selecting all items inside the laser item. So again, every single block, every single target. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to first pick every single laser item and set the color back to default. And then I'm going to pick the one the player is currently looking at. So there's a variable called player is looking at object UID. So you can get a particular object the player is looking at when using this function. And then I'm setting the color of that to red. So back of the world now. And every object that I now look at, which is a block, will highlight red. And again, this is just making use of the laser again. However, we're using an invisible version of the laser so we can't see it. So we just set the laser invisible just beforehand. So again, this is really, really useful. You can do some really, really cool stuff with this, because then you can say, if I'm looking at an object, then destroy it. So the targets do the same with this. The only thing is the targets, I believe, check if you're holding down the left trigger. Now, it's important to note that this has got a range to it. So you can see this block here, and then the back wall. I can't actually highlight the back wall, it's too far away. If I get close to the back wall, it will eventually, there we go, light up as well. You can customize this, so you can actually check the range. So if you've got something like a button, you can have it where if you get very, very close to the button, an action pops up saying press X. When you press X, you can then trigger the button to happen. The other example I want to show off is actually a teleport. So if I press the right bumper, I can actually teleport to what I'm looking at. So I can just teleport across, I can teleport to the edge of the wall if I don't want to teleport on top of the wall. So again, this is just a really, really simple and powerful option that we can do that doesn't actually require much code. You can see this is all the code we need for the teleport option. So am I pressing the right shoulder button? I'm going to activate the laser. I'm going to set the laser to be invisible so I can't see it. And then the hit cube is actually the end of the laser. So there's a tiny cube at the end of the laser. So we're just going to set the position to the hit cube. I'm going to set the Z elevation to the hit cube, and then I'm going to deactivate the laser. Again, really, really simple. The laser is probably the most advanced tool on here. If you can get your head around this, then the amount of possibilities that you can do in this engine open up massively. Now, if you come to the top of the screen, you'll see this green object here. This is actually the laser. It's got a mesh on it, which is why it looks green. But you'll see some different variables that you can change. First one is max distance. So how long is the laser? You can see in that example there that I wasn't able to hit the wall until I got fairly close to it. If I was to change this max distance to be further, then I could hit it from much further away. So again, you can actually change this in runtime. So for my teleport example, I could actually come across and I could actually add a new action. I could come to the projectile, laser, and I could scroll down, set the value of the max distance. And if I was to set this to say 2000, I've now got a reduced teleport range that I can only now go 2000 blocks. And then obviously what I want to do is if I want to use this laser for other stuff, I'll just set this back to what my default value was, 4000, if I'm using it for other parts. So again, ways that you could customize this much further. In terms of the variables, if you click on the laser object, mesh size I wouldn't mess around with unless you're quite confident with this. I'm just going to ignore that option. But laser width is just how thick the laser is. So if you want this laser to be slightly thicker or slightly thinner, you can change that as well. Next, let's talk about the third person camera. I've currently mapped this to the back button on an Xbox controller, but you can set this up. It's just a Boolean that's triggered, and you're able to view the game in third person mode. Now, there's a couple of issues with third person mode that I want to make you aware of. First of all, you can collect through walls at the moment. So that's something that will be planned for version 2 to fix that. Secondly is aiming in third person is quite a tricky task. So instead of having to work out the aiming angles, and again, you can see if I look all the way down and look all the way up, I'm not actually covering the full distance what I would if I was in first person mode. So a lot of games get around this by getting you to press a button and then you aim separately. The way I'm getting around this at the moment is just making it so you can only shoot in a straight line. You can't shoot up or down. This goes same for the laser as well. So you see the laser is now fixed on a permanent Z angle of just 0. It can't look up, it can't look down. So this is just a quick fix for now. There are plans to improve the third person mode. There are some bugs for the third person mode as well. So for one of them is when you change back to first person mode, you'll see I'm looking in a different direction. This only affects it one way, weirdly enough, so it works that way fine. However, it will take the old first person mode. It's a bug, it'll get fixed. I would use third person mode sparingly. If you're making a jumping game, great, that would be fantastic. If you're doing a shooter, maybe avoid it for now unless you're doing quite a simple shooter. But it is an option, and again, it is something that will be improved going forward. Going back to our layout, if we just click on the player, we can actually change if they're in first person or third person by default. And again, by just changing this Boolean inside the runtime, you can change that in the game, just like I've done with the back button. We've also got some options. So player height we've talked about already, but how tall the player is. This would be how high the camera is from the ground or how low it is to the ground. You've also got some options about the third person camera. So how far is the camera from the player and how high up is the camera? So these are two variables that you can change. So if you want to be further away from your player, that's absolutely fine. You can do that. If you want the camera to be higher up, you can change that as well. Next feature you should be seeing in the background right now. This is the day-night cycle. So this is something that is in a very early stage at the moment. So it just changes between shades of blue. So we're now at the peak of the day and that will start getting darker and go back to night. Now this is currently set as a 24-second cycle. I'm going to show you how you can customize this to be much longer, how you can customize all the different elements of this as well. And again, we're now going back to day. You'll also see that we've got the time of day written here. So this is between 1 and 24. So 1 being the start of the day, 24 being the end of the day. Now, when you come onto your world, if you scroll to the top, you'll see this little clock icon. If you click on here, you get some different options. So first of all, do you want to have the day-night cycle on? If you don't, just tick it off. What is the starting time? Now, the peak of the day is 12 and 13. 1 and 24 is nighttime. So with that in mind, you can actually do stuff like you can stuff in like Minecraft where you can change the time of day and you can go right time set 4, this will set it to sunrise. Now this is the bit that's quite useful, is how many seconds make up a day, how many minutes make up a day, and how many hours make up a day. All these values are added together to work out how often we should adjust this time variable by. So again, if you're looking at this and you're going, okay, I want 24 minutes per day, then we can do 24 minutes here. If you want to do 24 minutes and 45 seconds, you can. If you want to do 2 hours and 24 minutes and 45 seconds per day, you can. And all the code will adjust accordingly. It will still go through the same colors. I want to make some changes to adding some more oranges when you've got sunrise and sunset. But at the moment, this is sort of a basic version of the day-night cycle that we can add. The last major feature I want to look at then is terrain. So you'll notice that I've got this big bit of grass at the back. Now I'll tell you that terrain is far from finished. It's got a long way to go. So one thing you'll notice straight away is that gravity does not work with terrain. So actually disable gravity when you're on terrain, and it will just put you to the position that I think you should be in on the terrain. This is really clear if you jump off the world and then you go underneath the terrain, it will just pop you back up. So this doesn't work very well with the block objects. This is something that, again, is just a work in progress, but I want to show you where it currently is at. So what can we do with terrain so far? So first of all, we can walk up it. And yes, that bouncy effect is not because of OBS. That is something that is in the terrain code at the moment. It needs fixed. What we're doing is calculating the nearest Z axis based on the place coordinates. So this is using a mesh. So this mesh I think is 50 by 50. So it takes the nearest point the player is to and sets the elevation to that. What needs to be done instead is get a more approximate match without adding more mesh points, because that's just going to create more lag. But you can see that we can walk up and down this shape, and it's roughly where we should be. So it's not bad, it could be better. So why this shape? How did I get this shape? So under the example commands, there is this one called terrain. And I've got 2 different terrains, so you can choose which one you want to see. So this is the one that we've seen at the moment. So this takes a formula. We'll talk more about how the formula works in just a second. Terrain number, just leave as terrain demo.terrain number, that'll work it out for you, and then number of mesh points in the X and Y. I recommend keeping these both the same, unless you've got terrain that is sort of oblong, then you might want to recalculate that. But if not, keep them the same at the moment, it won't hurt. The more points you add, the more accurate it'll be, but the more lag it will be. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now on the construct example page, there's this really fantastic example called the graphing calculator. So Viridino Studios, big credit for this. I'm using a chunk of their code. So please have a look at their sort of links there. They are vital to getting the terrain working because they've made creating terrain much easier. So huge thanks to Viridino Studio for putting this example out there, because again, I'm using a chunk of their code to get mine to work. So how does it work? So the way this works is we're able to type in our own formulas to generate this terrain, or there's some example bits of code that we're able to use as well. So what we can actually do is when we've generated the terrain that we want, we can actually copy it out of this formula. Now there's no way to copy and paste this just outright, so you're just gonna have to type it out or go into the codes and type it out. But you can take this formula here, go back into this code here, and what I'm gonna do is just add an action. I'm gonna take the terrain that I've got, and there's this custom action called create terrain by formula. You can then type in that formula. Terrain number, again, at the moment, just do terrain demo dot terrain number, and that'll sort that out. Again, that'll be something that will not actually be in the next version. It'll do that automatically for you. And then it will create the terrain based on that formula. So again, this is just another way that we can create terrain. I do plan to have a terrain maker, which is based off a video that I did where I showed you how to make your own terrain, and this was before the idea of collision and all that came into question. So that's something that's in plan as well, to be able to create terrain from a file using a terrain creator. But at the moment we can do it using these formulas, which is a really, really simple and easy way, which is fantastic. Now, in terms of terrain, if you actually want to create additional terrain, you can. So to do that, you just right click, insert a new object, scroll down, and you want a tiled background. We'll call this terrain 2. Click, you can then make your terrain. Now, this is not a good idea to do a flat color because it will look a bit strange, but you can do stuff like the grass texture, sand textures, stuff that's got a lot more patterns to it, work really, really well. Obviously, once you've created it, you need to add it to the terrain family. So we're just going to edit family, and add the terrain. And then finally, you can come to your main file, and all I'm going to do is just actually replace this object with terrain 2. So it just uses that same formula. The formula is already built in, it's in the family. So again, you put in the formula, terrain number, terrain2.terrain number, that'll be fine. It'll work that out for you, and then hit done. One thing just be careful of is try not to reset the terrain. So once you've set this terrain demo and set the formula, don't set a new formula. It will break stuff. It doesn't work. I don't think it does anyway. So that's something to be mindful of. If you've got terrain overlapping each other, it can be very buggy. Terrain in general is a big, huge work in progress, but this is where it's currently at. And I think it's very promising on what we can do with this, be able to create terrain based on these formulas or use a map editor. And then again, I've got some ideas of how to get it to work with the other elements. Final things I just want to mention then, if you want to have any objects that are solid and the player can't go through, just to add them to the cube family. If you want to add any objects you want the laser to interact with, add them to the laser family. And if you want any projectiles, add them to the projectile family. Terrain we've just talked about, add that to the terrain family. In terms of layers, we've got the debug layer that you can turn off. That is that text that you've seen on the screen that tells you a little bit more information. There is a HUD here that's got nothing on it, but you're able to use this layer to add HUD elements. So how much health the player's got. The reticle is currently on there actually, so you can remove that if you don't want that on there. You can add in a gun sprite, so it looks like the player's holding a gun, and there's a really good zombie example out there on somebody using a HUD inside a 3D game. Touch controls have their own layer, and again, if you tick that off the player option, that will hide that. So you can just tick that off and it will automatically take care of that for you. And then everything else is on the game layer. You can also see my pink sprite at the top here. This is actually the model that's being used for the third person mode. So you can customize this and change this. You can actually also, if you're not aware with 3D objects, you can change each individual face. So if you create a 2D sprite, you can actually add that 2D sprite as your main image. On top of this version, you'll find in the description, you can also find a basic version, which just starts you off in a platform in the air. All the demo examples are gone. All the objects that are not needed are gone. So it just streamlines the experience a bit easier. So if you want to create your own game, that's a better starting point than this sort of clutter that is here. I do also aim to make a version 2. So this will include stuff like stairs that actually work, because it only really works if you jump at the moment. We want to make obviously huge improvements to terrain. Add in 3D lighting, 3D sound, so if you get closer to a sound, it will be louder, as well as, of course, bug fixes. If you've got any suggestions about what you'd like to see in version 2, 3, or however far this tool goes on, please let me know in the comments. What I will say is I'm looking for additions that will benefit the majority of people using this engine. So if you say stuff like a grappling hook, yes, grappling hooks would look great, and you could probably make a grappling hook in this tool using stuff like the laser. However, that's something that doesn't really affect many games. It's very, very niche. So I'm looking for additions that actually would benefit lots and lots of games, because that's the point of this engine. This engine is not a game. It's designed for you to start making your own games off this. In the description, you'll find this version, which is my sort of cluttered test world that you can try all the different bits out. But there's also a simplified version, which just starts you off a block in the sky. Apart from that, that is it for today. Hopefully you've enjoyed, hopefully you're going to use this tool, and I'll see you in the next video.